Here's one that's kind of the opposite. This is an oak fern, Gymnocarpium. So it's real skinny up the top, and then it just gets fatter and fatter. So it's just a big fat triangle. Let me see if I've got one of the in-between ones. Not a fantastic example, but here it's fattest in the middle, and it gets a little skinnier below it, but it doesn't go all the way to nothing. So that would be this one here. So it's fattest, goes to a point, gets skinnier, but doesn't go all the way to a point like the New York fern.
What's that?
Trapezoid shape?
What kind of fern?
What?
What kind of fern?
Oh, interrupted fern. I think there's some better examples, but I didn't grab the right one, I guess. Sorry about that. So
it's not a great example.
This isn't great because I literally just passed it around, but what's this one? Yeah, so New York fern. So this one's fattest in the middle, and it's basically diamond shaped. So it goes down to nothing, goes up to nothing.
This is one that's being passed around that you said is a diamond shape. I can't remember the name of it. But I see, like, it looks like a leaflet and then another leaflet, another leaflet. Is that all one on one stem that goes on here?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so can I grab it for a second? So this one here, this has 4 leaves and a little tiny fiddlehead that you probably can't see. So each of these is a leaf. So for one leaf shape, it's this here. So what kind of stem does this one have? Long creeping, that's right.
Yeah.
So this is the long creeping rhizome right here. Does that make sense?
I was just thinking each stem that
Yeah.
came up under that one leaf.
Yeah, that's actually the leaf stuff. Can I grab it again, actually?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
I've done my business.
See how annoying that can be here. So yeah, this is the petiole or leaf stalk here. So this is the stipe. So on this species, it's pretty long. So this stipe here, that's this long stalk here on the fern. So this is a leaf stalk. This is part of the leaf. The stem is just this thicker part down here with the roots coming off. How do people feel about this stuff so far? Any questions? Know it already? Okay. The dissection of the leaf is important. So this, you're basically telling whether it's a simple leaf or whether it's a compound leaf. So like how walnuts have compound leaves. How familiar are we with those terms? People know what compound leaf is? Anybody not? Okay. So a compound leaf is where it's divided into different segments or leaflets. And
Those legs are small. Yeah, that's right.
It's taken about 5 minutes for my advanced organization system to descend into chaos here. Here we go. So this is that walking fern that I used from the example earlier. I think this is our only simple leafed fern in West Virginia. But you have the little leaf stalk, and then there's just one blade of tissue. There's no more divisions of it. It's not separated into leaflets or anything.
You have one of those potted up in the back, don't you?
Did I bring that one?
Yeah, I think.
No, actually
it's
I
not?
didn't. Yeah,
Oh.
Does that look like?
yeah.
Looks like it.
We do have one in the greenhouse, but I didn't bring it.
What's the difference between pennant to fit and pennant?
Yeah, so there gets to be a lot of terminology for leaf shape. So I can show you a few. So the first one going around the walking fern, that one's simple. There's no divisions to the leaf. It's just one big leaf, no leaflets. So Christmas fern is once pinnate. There's 2 leaves on this sheet, and they have leaflets that are totally separate from each other. So they go down and they emerge from this discrete point on the leaf on the rachis here, and there's one leaflet. There's one leaflet. So that's once pinnate. The leaf stalk is divided one time into these segments. So the pinnatifid is kind of in between being simple and once pinnate. So this is a polypody, genus Polypodium, very creative common name. So this, it's on the border. It's almost once pinnate, but there's still a little bit of lobing between the leaflets, a little bit of leaf tissue connecting them. So this is very deeply pinnatifid.
I think this sticker in there says resurrection.
Oh, is this
Resurrection.
resurrection? Oh yeah, sorry, I grabbed the wrong pot. Yeah, so it's the same family, but this is resurrection fern. So this one, if you see the scales on the back, when this dries up, it'll curl up like it's dead, and then those scales absorb water and it comes back to life. So it's resurrection fern. I did a collecting trip through the southeast with my dad when I was in college, and we collected a resurrection fern and kept it on the dashboard of the truck and kept drying it out and rehydrating it. And we named it Elvis, and it was like our little trip mascot. Here's a good one that's pretty obviously pinnatifid here, or a little more obviously. So it's not simple, but the lobes are not totally discrete. They're not totally divided into separate leaflets.
Yeah, they're kind of all joined. They're like separate, but not really. Yeah, it's like, it's really.
So the little leaflets will be touching just a little bit at their.
Yeah, so they're joined together a little bit.
Yeah. It's the whole
See
thing.
if I have a good, here we go.
That's a really good example.
So this one, it's more obvious on the lower ones, but you have a leaf, it comes out, there's a division, a leaflet, and then there's divisions of that leaflet. I'll move the post-it to point at it here. So this one is twice pinnate. So pinnate is where it's divided into leaflets, and then if the leaflet is divided into segments, that's twice pinnate. And there's a lot of different possibilities, so I won't pass them all around, just because you're probably not going to remember 100 of them if we go through them all. But this is the bipinnatifid, the upper right corner one. So this, it's not fully divided either way. There's leaf tissue connecting the leaflets, and then the leaflet itself is not quite divided into segments either. So this is bipinnatifid or twice pinnatifid. But there's most of the characters in this that we're covering this morning are more useful for telling different genera apart. This is one of the characters that is more useful both for telling one genus from another, but also from telling different species within a genus. It's like all the Dryopterists we have around here. You can tell some of them apart by how divided or dissected the leaves are.
Any of these things are sections. Yeah, you can see.
How do people feel about leaf dissection here?
Comfortable.
Okay, comfortable? Yeah. Yeah, so cnatophyd means that division doesn't go all the way to the radius. So this is the walking fern, so what's this one?
Simple.
Simple.
Yep, so simple or entire leaved means the same thing. You can also tell a little bit about the plant just by where it's growing. So it's helpful to pay attention to its habitat. So you can see, is it deep inside the forest? That might be a lady fern. Or is it on the forest edge? That's more likely to be a hay-scented fern. Is it in a wet meadow? Is it on a cliff? If it's on a cliff, what's the substrate? Is it basic or acidic? So is it limestone or granite sort of thing? For the substrate, is it growing on dirt or is it growing on rocks? So maidenhair spleenwort, the Splenium trichomones, pretty much always on rock. Ebony spleenwort, the small ones can kind of look like them, but it's usually on dirt. So if you find it on dirt, it's probably ebony spleenwort. If you find it on rock, probability-wise, it's probably maidenhair spleenwort, but it could still be the other one. So you can make these observations and narrow things down a little bit too. Sometimes habitats blur together, sometimes they grow where they're not supposed to. So this isn't like a totally foolproof character, but it can help a lot. So just kind of think, where am I? Am I in the forest? Am I on the edge of the forest? Am I in a meadow? Am I in a bog? Is the plant growing out of the soil, out of the dirt? Is it growing on a rock? There's only one epiphyte in West Virginia. That's the resurrection fern back there. And I think it's pretty rare in the state. So normally you don't really need to worry about epiphytes much. Epiphyte just means it grows on a tree. Mainly it's more, is it on rock or is it on soil? So this one here, we can help narrow it down. It's hard to tell from the picture, but this is a limestone outcrop. So this is limestone, it's rock, and this is bulblet bladder fern. So bulblet fern pretty much only grows on limestone rock. So if you're trying to figure out if it's bulblet bladder fern and you're on an outcrop of granite, it's probably not bulblet bladder fern. You would need to be in this high pH limestone environment to get bulblet bladder fern. What happened? So yeah, that's the habitat stuff. So yeah, that one's a little mushier. You know, you look in the field guides, and it'll blur together more. It's not always as reliable, but it's still a really helpful source of information. You know, most of the things you run into are going to be pretty typical. It's unusual to find something growing in some totally new environment. So usually when you find something that's supposed to be in the forest edge, you know, it'll be growing on the forest edge. So usually this is a fairly reliable one, but it's not like totally foolproof. There's a few reproductive characters that we can use. So for these, you know, the plants do have to be reproductive. They do have to be making spores. But if they are, we can use these characters, and they're really helpful. So the first is whether the leaves are dimorphic, so whether they have two forms. So whether the fertile leaves and the sterile leaves look the same or look different. If fertile leaves and sterile leaves look different from each other, they're dimorphic. If they look the same, they're monomorphic. So here's a monomorphic. This is the Asplenium trichomones I mentioned. So they've flipped a leaf over to show the sori. But other than the presence of these sori, the leaves look the same. So these are monomorphic. This is a different species, but I'll pass it around. This one's monomorphic. So all the leaves look like this, it's just whether or not they have sori on the back. But then some species have dimorphic leaves. So this is cinnamon fern. I'll pass one around. So you can see there's big green leaves. These are the photosynthetic ones. These are the vegetative leaves. And they look totally different than these leaves in the middle. These leaves are much skinnier, and they're cinnamon colored, so cinnamon fern. So in this plant, it uses a division of labor. It makes big fat leaves that just do nothing but photosynthesize, and it makes skinny, taller leaves that do nothing but produce spores and get those spores off into the air. So that's dimorphic, two forms.
So these are nuts for,
Sori?
stalks? Yes.
Yeah, so there are sori in here. They're just tiny. These are basically just really scrunched up leaves, and there's little sori on there that have sporangia. So a lot of the things, in botany, I mean, all natural history, but in botany, there's always exceptions. So pretty much everything I've said today, you could probably find some fern or some lycophyte that defies what I said. But one that we will worry about a little bit more are hemidimorphic leaves. So we have a few species that are indecisive, and instead of making fertile and sterile leaves that all look the same or that look completely different, they make leaves that have a portion that looks really different because it's fertile and a portion that looks really different because it's sterile, but it's all one leaf. So around here, royal fern and interrupted fern are good examples. So this is a royal fern specimen, one leaf on this sheet. Actually, I think it's just part of the leaf. But you can see part of the leaf has these big green leaflets photosynthesizing away. And then the top are these little constricted brown leaflets. All they're doing is making sporangia and spores. So these are hemidimorphic. They look somewhat different or have different portions. So what's this one? Yep, hemidimorphic. So this is interrupted fern. So if this is fertile, you can tell it from cinnamon fern really easily because interrupted fern is hemidimorphic. The middles of the leaves have totally different leaflets that are making spores. And cinnamon fern is fully dimorphic. It has totally different looking sterile and fertile leaves. So usually this is more of a genus level thing, like you can tell one genus from another. This example that I just used where you can tell interrupted fern and cinnamon fern apart, that one, they're fairly more closely related. But usually it's more distant things. Good on dimorphism? So that sorus that we talked about earlier, it gets a little more complicated. You can have a covering over the sorus. It's called an indusium. So just to review, when we look on the underside of the leaf, these are leptosporangiate ferns, so the underside of the leaf, we find little clusters or aggregations of sporangia. Each of those little clusters is called a sorus, plural is sori. each sorus is made up of a bunch of sporangia, and each sporangium is making a bunch of spores. So the indusium is a covering over the sorus. It's a covering over this big cluster of sporangia. And just like the leaf shape, or leaf dimorphism, there's three possibilities. So the first is that they can be X-indusiate. They can just have no indusium. So here in this photo, you can see little brown bumps. Each of those is a sporangium. They're just exposed, no covering, X-indusiate. And then the other two conditions both have an indusium or a covering, but they get it different ways. So they're called true and false, but the true and false, kind of implies like some kind of value judgment or something. They're just terms. Doesn't really mean anything beyond that. Probably should have different names. So the true indusium is where the bottom of the leaf grows a little covering. So it's like the bottom of the leaf grows a little umbrella. The false indusium is where the edge of the leaf curls over. It wraps around and covers the sporangia. So here we have little kind of kidney bean shaped, or maybe omega shaped, I don't know what you want to call them, indusia that are coming up and covering the sorus. So each of these little horseshoes here, each of these is an indusium, and the sporangia are protected or covered underneath them. And then on this one, the edge of the leaf just curls over, and those sporangia are hidden inside of there. So in this photo, they've broken one off. So that they took this and just went, so you can see the sporangia hiding out inside of it. Oh. So X-indusiate is no covering at all. So around here, polypodium is the one that you're going to run into the most with that. I'm going to pass an example around. That potted plant that went around back in that corner now, that one's X-indusiate too. So the false indusium, that's usually things in the family Pteridaceae. So on that chart, the spreadsheet, the Pteridaceae section, pretty much all of those things have a false indusium. So a few of these are flipped over to show the sporangia. So the ones with false indusia, they're always along the edge, because it's the edge of the leaf curling over.
Common name for that family would be what?
Cliff break ferns. Maidenhair's in there, but otherwise most of them are cliff loving ferns. Yeah, I'll pass this maidenhair around too. So maidenhair has false indusia as well. I think the sporangia are really young on this one, so it's pretty hard to tell, but the edge of these little leaflets will get a little thicker as it curls around.
Which fern did you say most commonly was X-indusiate?
The polypodium, and also that resurrection fern, the Pleopeltis.
And of all these reproductive characters, which percentages are we likely to encounter?
Mostly true. So the false or the no indusium, I think it's just those three species in a hybrid.
Right.
In the Polypodiaceae. The false indusium, I think, is just the Pteridaceae.
Right.
And the others are true. So here's
True
a
is
live
most
mate
likely.
here. This is a tropical species, so it looks a little different than ours. But when you look on the undersides, you'll see a lot of the leaves have a false indusium. And there's plenty on there, so if you want to mess with the leaflets, you can.
Just the fact that it's on the edge. It's just the fact that it's on the edge. Is that true? Yeah, maybe it's not.
Okay. And the true indusium, so that's where the covering comes out from the bottom of the leaf like a little umbrella. So this lady fern has it. The leaf up here, I'll move the sticker up here. This leaf is fertile with the sori exposed. And then this is a live one. This is another tropical one, so not something we'll see around here. It's only got one leaf that's fertile, but these have true indusium. So you can take a look underneath that one leaf there. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I thought it had the, top.
No, it looks like this one has some bulblets for vegetative reproduction.
Is that what that
I think that's what you're seeing, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. So the indusium is a pretty good character for telling different genera apart. The two downsides is that it has to be fertile. You can't tell it if it's sterile. And then the other downside is that as the plants mature, they don't need that indusium protecting the sporangia anymore. So the sporangia kind of push it aside. So it starts out with the sporangia under this indusium, and then when the sporangia are ready to get rid of their spores, they want the spores to catch the wind. So they push that indusium out of the way. So on the really mature plants, it can be hard to see the indusium because it's getting overgrown, basically. So here's a close-up of the X-indusium. So it's just a cluster of sporangia. There's no covering.
So when you look at a guidebook, will it to identify with precision, it will talk about the reproductive that you will see on the leaf?
Pretty much all the field guides should have
Okay.
indusium type. Yeah, I know the Peterson guide does.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the shape of them is important too, but we'll get to that in a minute. And this is just a little bit of a close-up on the true indusium. So each of these little horseshoes here, it's growing up. You can kind of see the little donut hole. So it's growing up from here. It's kind of horseshoe shaped and it's covering sporangia around it. And then the false indusium, the edge of the leaf is just curling over.
It looks like it has probably sporangia in there. You know? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just a general question.
Yeah.
Any of these birds you put in the junior for, they just.
Yeah, it's, so West Virginia and Virginia have like, I think it's over 95% overlap. So just about all of these will be in the Florida, Virginia. You'll have some more too, you know, we have some more southern things that don't show up in West Virginia. But yeah, the Florida, Virginia is pretty, I don't know if it's completely comprehensive for the ferns or not, but it'd be pretty close.
You seen these little books?
Oh, the Fern Finder, yeah.
They're for like people that don't like me that
Yeah.
don't really know very
Well, hopefully you'll know a lot now. But yeah, I've used that one, yeah.
Have you found these?
It's like all dichotomous.
I have my walking.
So what's this one?
And I take that with us.
Sounds like all the votes are for false. This is false indusium. This is
It looks like
a rare
it.
bracken fern that's fertile.
I mean, that's real obvious because it's curling. The leaves are curling around the.
So ex-indusium and false indusium, they're pretty much yes, no. For the true indusium, you can get a little bit more information by looking at what shape it is. So this is a few of the possibilities. They can be kind of cup-shaped, so they can kind of rise up out of the leaf a little bit, like a little cup. They can be kidney-shaped, like those ones we were just looking at on that example slide. They can be totally round. There's a few other possibilities too. This isn't exhaustive. The spleenworts have kind of rectangular or linear
Oh, it's all
shaped
on there.
indusium. You can also get ones that are kind of comma-shaped or J-shaped. So making notes on what the indusium looks like can help you narrow down your possibilities too. Anybody want to guess what this one is?
It's
True. So it's true. What shape is it?
True.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. It's more of a hand lens character.
Yeah, you can't tell.
But these are
it's a
cup
true.
shaped. You can see how they're casting a shadow here. They're kind of rising up out of the bottom.
So rising up, I mean, you mean coming up at your face if you're looking from
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. They're much more three-dimensional than the
Yeah.
other ones. So how do we feel on indusium types?
Pretty good.
Know our
You
false
covered it
from our
well.
true from our no?
Yeah.
You covered it very well.
Okay.
That's interesting, right.
So there's a few kind of weird things in the state. So just for lack of other options, I just put them in as outliers. So we actually have a species that has lost its sporophyte. So that alternation of generations where we talked about how the big sporophyte in the woods would make a spore and that becomes a gametophyte. The sperm and egg fuse and you get new sporophyte. It only does that gametophyte part. It looks like this. This is highly magnified. So it doesn't have the heart-shaped gametophyte either. It's one of the very few ferns that doesn't. So these are strap-shaped. This is on that spreadsheet there. It's in the Pterodaceae. It's on the second page. It's the Viteria appalachiana, the shoestring fern. So this one actually has a pretty cool story. This thing grows deep in caves usually, usually sandstone caves. And you'll find little pockets of this, kind of like a little filamentous mass. Looks like a moss or an algae. And it only grows by gametophyte. It'll reproduce asexually. So the gametophyte can divide itself. It can make little kind of the gametophyte version of runners. It can just grow out and have little extensions. And it can get separated in floods. It grows in these very high humidity caves that are usually right along rivers. So it gets spread through the river system. It doesn't make a sporophyte at all. And it was kind of a mystery for a long time. And this is one where DNA evidence has been pretty neat. They found that it's genetically almost completely identical to a normal fern in the Caribbean that makes a sporophyte and everything. So from the research they've done, as near as they can tell is that during the Pleistocene, when the glaciers retreated really far back and it was a lot hotter, this fern colonized the eastern U.S. from the Caribbean. And then when the glaciers advanced and it got a lot colder, the sporophyte for this species can't survive the cold, but the gametophyte can. They've tested this experimentally. So this species actually lost its sporophyte as an adaptation to the cold. So today, they've actually tried, there's chemicals that you can use to make things grow a sporophyte from a gametophyte, and it won't do it. It's just completely lost the sporophyte. It only exists as this gametophyte. So you'll see this one in the guidebook and on the key and stuff. You gotta be in these wet sandstone caves and you gotta have a really good eye. These are really hard to spot. even when you do see them, it's really easy to walk by or to not know if they're a moss or even an algae. But they are in the flora, and they are one of the weirder things. So this is our gametophyte-only species, the Vitaria. And I realized I made a mistake on the spreadsheet. On the first page, this Vandenboschia, the second to last entry, I said that it was a gametophyte-only species. It's not. One of its relatives is in Virginia, but not the West Virginia one. And that one probably should have had its own slide. It's what's called a filmy fern. So the folks went to New Zealand. Same family of plants as you'll find in New Zealand. These filmy ferns are 1 cell thick, so they're very filmy or thin. So because they're 1 cell thick, they don't have stomata for gas exchange, so they grow in really wet places. So you often find them in those cloud forests or rainforests that I mentioned earlier. These grow pretty similar spots to that gametophyte. They like really high humidity caves. So this is not one you're going to run across very often, but it's one of the weirder ones in the state. So this one, I know it's uncommon in West Virginia. I'm not sure exactly how many populations they are. But this is Lygodium palmatum, the Hartford fern. It's one of the most gorgeous ferns in the area. This is actually one leaf. So one leaf looks like a plant of ivy. So this is not stem, this is leaf stalk, this is rachis here. And each leaflet looks like a little ivy leaf. And then this is a hemidimorphic one. The fertile portions are up at the end of the leaf, and they're much smaller and more constricted. But this, the common name's Hartford fern, and it, after Hartford, Connecticut, I think Connecticut was the first state to pass a law protecting a plant solely on account of its beauty. So this plant was over-collected in the 1800s, and it's such a wonderful plant that Connecticut passed a law banning its collection just to preserve its beauty. But this is our only twining fern.
So is it very vine-like?
Yes.
It looks really more like a vine.
And what's its general habitat?
Wet, rich woods. I think it's acidic woods. Yeah, it's not very common around Tech. I think we have 2 populations within an hour or 2 drive. One of them could fit on this podium. I know you have a few in West Virginia, but it is one of the neater ones. If you do see it, it's pretty recognizable. Its
Does it
cousin,
climb?
what's up?
Does it climb on
It'll
things?
climb a little bit. Like it's not going to climb like 30 feet up a tree, but it'll climb like over the understory or up onto the bottom parts of a tree trunk. Its cousin, the Japanese climbing fern, Lygodium japonicum, is a huge invasive species in Florida. It'll just cover entire forests and kill them off. But our native one is much more rare. So we talked about this a little bit. We do have a couple aquatic ferns. So this is the Azolla. Somebody was asking about it looking red. So in this picture you can see some of it's turning red. I forget which way it is. I think sunlight causes it to turn red. Could be shade makes it red. I don't remember exactly. But this is that tiny little one where the plant can fit on your thumbnail. And it's aquatic and it fixes nitrogen. One species is listed in the flora. I did research on this group, published a paper on it, and I feel comfortable telling you that every species of this looks identical, so don't. If you find it, just stop at Azolla and don't bother. Yeah, so I don't know where the sheet for that is, but If somebody sees that, maybe they could pass it back around. We do have some aquatic lycophytes too. So, you know, mostly I've talked about the ferns today, but that group of lycophytes, the ones that have those microphyll, the more simple leaves, have the spore brandy on the upper side.
This is a nice handle. Yes. From agriculture department. This is good.
This is the Azola that's coming around again.
Oh, thank you. Oh, this is that aquatic.
Yeah, the one.
The Azola. Azola. It's Azola. I put the Azola.
Does anybody have the specimen that looks kind of like grass?
Oh, the grass one.
So, yeah. Oh, there's more down there.
Yeah.
So these lycophytes, the isoedes, most of the professional fern biologists pronounce it isoedes. Some call it isodes. You're fine with either. These isodes or isoedes, they're called quillworts. It's the one that I passed around that looks like grass, but these are also aquatic. And this is one where the habitat's helpful, because sometimes they're fully aquatic, like 10 feet under a lake. Sometimes they're on the edge of the lake. Sometimes they're in muddy water along the stream or lake. So paying attention to your habitat can help with identifying these. Otherwise, honestly, I'd be pretty happy to find one and probably stop at isodes. Usually you have to look at the megaspores and look at the patterns on the megaspores to identify them to species. So once you actually spot them, they're an easy group to identify to genus and really hard to identify to species. But they have this little swelling at the base. On this one you can see some of the megaspores leaking out. So the sporangia are down at the base here on the upper side of the leaf. And then if you slice one of the leaves, they actually have 4 air chambers in them. So you can tell them from grass that way or from sedges. But, yeah. Some do, yeah. So some you'll literally, you know, walk out onto a pier and the water's 10 feet deep and they'll be down at the bottom. Okay, so the last of our outliers are the hybrids. So I don't know what there is, 5 or 10, maybe 10 hybrids in the state. So normally you don't run into these as frequently. A couple exceptions, of course. But the hybrids on the sheet, on the spreadsheet, any of the hybrids have their parents listed over in the comments column. But this example for the hybrids, I'll pass the parents around and I'll pass the hybrid around. But that walking fern that we've talked about a few times, it's one of the parents. And the ebony spleenwort, which is one of our most common ferns, especially in limey forests, is the other parent. So walking fern has those simple leaves. Ebony spleenwort has once pinnate leaves. Their hybrid, Asplenium ebenoides, Scots spleenwort, is called the dragon tail fern. The tips of the leaves look like they're entire and will root at the tip like walking fern. And then the bottoms are more pinnatophyte or maybe even once pinnate. So it's basically like you gave my 6-year-old these 2 parents and told him to mash them up. The hybrid is pretty much exactly intermediate between the parents.
I'm sorry, what did you call the middle fern?
Common name is Scots spleenwort, and dragontail fern is the other common name. You can get it through the horticultural trade. not super easy, but like mail order things usually.
It's too bad you can't see this one, so well, it's really pretty. on that.
Probably more information than you want to know, but Scott's spleenwort, the hybrid, shows up across the eastern U.S. It doesn't form all the time. You know, you can find the two parents growing together, and you usually won't find the hybrid. But you can find the hybrid probably in 10 or 15 states. And it's almost always just a couple plants, because
Isn't
the
that
hybrid
interesting?
is sterile,
That
so it doesn't make good spores. So it can reproduce by spores. But there's one population in Alabama that made the hybrid, and then it doubled its chromosomes, and it can make functional spores. So that one site in Alabama, there's thousands of plants of this hybrid. And then they've actually made the hybrid in the laboratory. They used some chemicals to speed the process along and got the parents to hybridize. So I think that's where most of the horticultural plants come from. But it was the first hybrid fern to be made artificially. Virginia Slauson, about 120 years ago, made this as an experiment and proved that the wild one was a hybrid. So the example is actually going to be slightly different. So the aspleniums hybridize like crazy. There's this asplenium triangle. I can show you a picture in the flora of North America back there. There's 3 species that they looked at originally, 3 parents. They all hybridize with each other. So if you put each of the 3 parents at the corner of a triangle, the middle of every line has a hybrid. And then the hybrids hybridize again with their own parents and with each other. So if you get really into these groups, most of them are pretty rare, but there's probably about a dozen hybrid species. But this example, walking fern is one of the parents again. The other parent is the mountain spleenwort. And this is its hybrid baby, lobed spleenwort, Asplenium pinnatifidum. You find this one on sandstone cliffs. I collected this up in Pocahontas County, up near Cass before. Definitely shows up around West Virginia. Not this specimen here, but the species.
This is the berries.
Yeah.
So should we put the parents on the 2 parents on top of the baby? Okay, thank you.
Should have thought of that before.
Good.
Mom, dad,
Yeah.
kid.
Okay.
So somebody just made a joke about which one was mom and which was dad. You can actually tell with DNA. The chloroplast that's doing photosynthesis, it has its own genes, and it's only inherited through the mom. So if you take the hybrid and sequence its chloroplast DNA, it'll match its mother's. So then the other species would be the father.
So really
And it differs with each plant.
great
Yeah,
pictures.
yeah. For some hybrids, it's always the same mother. For some hybrids, it's like random. Hybrids are something that like we simultaneously know a lot about and very little about. So why that is, we don't really know. So a few people have been asking about field guides. So back here on the table, have all the ones mentioned on this slide here. But the one that I would probably recommend is the Peterson guide, the new one. Yeah, second edition. The one that says has 3 authors instead of 1. Basically, there's no great fern field guide for the Mid-Atlantic. So this is a little more geared towards the northeastern U.S., but it's pretty up to date. It's pretty well illustrated. It's pretty accurate. It's pretty easy to use. So this is probably the one I would recommend. A lot of adjacent states have field guides. Some are older than others. Like the Ferns of Tennessee is, I think, about 50 years old. But then Georgia has a pretty new one. So depending on what kind of habitat you're at or what part of the state, you might find some of those useful. But in general, I would recommend this one probably. The first edition's back there too, so you can look at them. There's also a book with a green cover back there called The Flora of North America. When this project's over, there'll be about 30 volumes. It'll cover all the plants in the US and Canada. Volume 2 is the fern one. It's back there. So the nice thing is that it has identification keys to all the species. It has a range map for all the species. And I think it's every 4th species or something like that has an illustration. The downside is that it's really expensive, like $100. It's really heavy and it's really technical. Like if you thought there was a lot of terminology this morning, that's a whole nother world. So unless you get super into it, I probably wouldn't recommend it. The one useful thing is that all of the information is online for free. So the range maps especially, and sometimes the line drawings are pretty useful. So you can go to this website, or you can Google it, like E-Flora, Flora of North America, and the genus or species name, and it'll usually bring it up, and then you can see the range map, or if it has a line drawing, you can see that. And the Flora of Virginia is back there as well. So like I was saying earlier, there's almost complete overlap between the states. So there might be a couple things in West Virginia that aren't in the key, and there's gonna definitely be a few southern things in the Flora of Virginia that are not in West Virginia. But it's nice because it's comprehensive. Downside, same deal. It's $100. It's really heavy. It's very technical. So if you get really into it, maybe you want to shell out for those. But for the most part, I would just suggest the new Peterson guide, the 2nd edition. And these files, so the spreadsheet, the Fern ID basics, the West Virginia flyer, I mentioned that checklist of West Virginia plants, and then that fern biology presentation that I started with. You can download all of those here. I made a little folder on my Google Drive. This is a shortcut to it. It's in the printout of the Fern ID basics. This slide is in there, so you don't have to write down the link.
Yeah.
But if you go there, you can download any of these files and have the file if you lose it or want another copy or something. So that's pretty much it for the formal portion of the workshop. This is our website that occasionally gets updated. If you do Facebook or Twitter, that sort of thing, we have an account where we try to post pictures of our new discoveries or what our students are up to, or that sort of thing. We have about 20 minutes. So for the rest of the class, there's a couple other live plants back there. So if people want to come back, I can show you what's kind of neat about those. There's also a couple dissecting scopes, so if you want help